dining experience interesting and enjoyable to all. Plus, they focus on locally sourced food and beer. Nightingale is located at 2551 Lindale Avenue South in Minneapolis. Find more details at eatlocalminnesota.com.
Good afternoon, AM950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Doug Pagitt in today. Broadcasting out of the Twin Cities, but I'm actually in New York City, doing all kinds of other things here in New York City, but glad to be part of the Drive Time show, and super excited to be talking with Alex Thornton. Alex is at the Center for American Progress and is a tax expert. Now, you might say to yourself, oh, is there anything exciting and important about taxes? Well, Alex is going to help us understand why that is and how important it is. So, Alex, thanks so much for being on AM950 today.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I'll try to be interesting.
I know it's certainly interesting to me. I'm sure as a tax professional for the Center for American Progress, people are often going to you for all their big tax questions, especially around tax policy, which can frankly just be overwhelming to so many of us. So I'm going to start by thanking you for the good work that you do in paying attention to what's happening at the policy level and for breaking it all apart for all of us. It's really important work, so thanks for being a part of that. This story about the Trump administration considering making this big tax change on their own, I guess from the Treasury Department, is one of those complicated tax implication questions that has a lot of influence and a lot of implication on what would happen in our taxes. Can you give a quick rundown of what it is that the Trump administration is suggesting? It has something to do with changing the capital gains taxes and building in inflation when people have to pay their taxes. Can you walk us through that for those of us who don't pay as much attention as you do?
Sure. Well, first of all, when people have capital assets, whether it's a home or stock, if they sell it, they have gain. And the way they calculate their gain is they take the original price they paid for it and they subtract that from how much they got when they sold it, and that's their capital gain, and they're taxed on that. And since 1918, when the statute was first put into law about how you calculate this gain, it's been understood that the cost you subtract, the basis that you subtract, is just the nominal cost that you paid. If I paid $10, whether it was in 2000 or 2005 or whatever, it's basically that amount that I subtract from what I gain when I sell it today. But what the Trump administration and congressional Republicans want to do is to be able to say that when you calculate that gain, the cost that you paid for it should be adjusted for inflation. So if you paid $10 in 2000, well, today that might be worth, I don't know what it would be, $40 or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the amount that you would subtract would be much greater and your gain would be much smaller and you would owe a lot less tax. So that's basically what they're talking about. But what they want to do is to have Treasury simply regulate this change and say that, well, we're just interpreting the statute and we're going to reinterpret it to say that cost basis is the inflated cost.
Yeah, it's just really something. I mean, it is one of the, as I understand it, this idea of reducing the amount that someone would pay in capital gains feels by building inflation into the equation, feels like nothing more than a way to benefit the most wealthy people who are taking capital gains. Is there any societal or economic benefit to making some change like this that they could make this argument on, other than they just think that the capital gains taxes are too high?
You are absolutely right that this would benefit the wealthiest Americans. In fact, it's heavily skewed to the wealthiest. I think 86% of assets are held by the top 10% of stock is held by the top 10% of households. And, basically what we're talking about here is, we already have a lower tax rate on capital gains, right? It's 20% for capital gain, whereas what people have paid on their wages goes up to 37%, right? Wages and salaries are subject to ordinary tax rates that go up to 37%. And so part of the rationale for having a lower tax rate on capital gains is that if you hold it for a long time, part of that gain is inflationary, so we give you a lower rate. It's way too low, and most progressive folks think it should be much higher, but especially if you were to adjust the basis for inflation, you would want to then tax any gain you have left at ordinary rates.
And I read an article about this, and they were saying that the George H. Bush administration looked at trying to do something like this and made the determination that in our current law, this is not something that an administration can do or the Treasury Department can do. It has to be done through statute, through the legislation.
Through Congress, exactly. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Both the Treasury Department's General Counsel and the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel said that Treasury didn't have the authority to allow indexation of basis for inflation. And not only that, that was before and after that, there's an enormous amount of contemporaneous Treasury pronouncements, other provisions of the Internal Revenue Code, interpretive canons, legislative history, all of which support the idea that cost is the price paid in nominal terms, not adjusted for inflation.
Is there any is this all a part of? Did this come up because the Trump administration wasn't happy with what was included in the big tax bill giveaway that just happened a few months ago, and this is their workaround? They really wanted this into that tax bill, couldn't get it, so now they're double dipping into the cheese sauce at the party off the half-eaten chip.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. They obviously they're benefiting their donors, right? And they did a great deal for their donors in the bill that was passed in December. This is a way to give even more to their wealthy donors and to the wealthy generally. And the thing about having Treasury do it is they don't have to worry about getting any agreement from Democrats in the House or Senate because, you see, before they passed a tax bill under that special budget reconciliation rule that enabled them to only have 50 votes. But now they don't have that available right now, so they would have to have 60 votes to get this additional huge, juicy tax cut for the wealthy. So they want to do it, have Treasury do it, and of course they're looking at the elections coming up. They want to have as many, wealthy tax cuts as possible before the election.
Is one of the arguments here that this benefits farmers? I hear that a lot when people talk about these taxes on the wealth, the tax breaks that seem to benefit the wealthy. I hear conservatives and Republicans say things like, well, who it's actually helping are these people you call wealthy, but they're actually these family farmers, and family farmers get hit with high capital gains taxes, and so we're trying to relieve the tax burden on that part of the population. Is there any truth to that calculation? And is that
I don't know, because the reality is that usually when they're saying that, they're referring to the estate tax and the valuation of capital assets under the estate tax.
I see.
But there is a rule, a special rule that farmers have under the estate tax that basically says they can have special use valuation. They can value their farm as it would be valued, as it would be as a farm, not in terms of its development value. And so they already get a special break under the estate tax. And the estate tax, especially now that the changes were made in the tax bill that was passed in December, it hits hardly anyone at all.
Oh, is that right?
And so, it's hard to believe that this would be a big problem. But what you just pointed out is another reason why Treasury really shouldn't be making this change, and that is this change would actually open up a lot of loopholes. Because if you allow capital gains to be indexed for inflation, but you don't make certain other changes in the tax law, there are ways that taxpayers can do what's called arbitrage. They can take advantage of differences in the way things are defined across the tax code to basically get a much bigger tax cut. And so, for example, this is especially true with debt. If I buy a capital asset with debt, and then I can adjust my gains when I sell it for inflation, it's hard to, without getting into technical an example, I can basically double dip.
Yeah.
And that's what the loopholes would be that would arise if Treasury just went and did this instead of Congress looking at it in a comprehensive manner.
Well, Alex, I know you're going to stay on over to the next segment, and I'd like to ask you about how the tax bill that was just passed, how you are now seeing it playing out. But one last thing on this proposal. How likely do you think this is? How possible is it that Treasury is going to be able to reinterpret the rules about evaluation of an asset?
Well, I don't suppose there's any way to stop them initially from doing it. They could be challenged. There actually are a number of tax experts that have said that there are a number of groups that would have standing to sue. And so, for example, state governments, because they link a lot to the federal tax law, there are certain states that actually would find that they had lower tax revenues because of this change. And so they would be very concerned about that, and they would obviously be affected and have standing. There are reasons to believe also that brokers who are required to have certain reporting requirements on basis of assets would be affected and might have standing. And there are also charitable organizations might also have standing
so it'd be
because of how they would be affected.
It would be lawsuits that would have to solve this. Well, that's Alex Thornton. She's from the Center for American Progress. She's a tax professional and expert. And after the break, we're going to talk a little bit about the last tax cut that was passed and how it's impacted us. This is AM950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. I'm Doug Pagitt, and Drive Time.
Tom Hartman here telling you that solar energy isn't just for environmentalists. Switching to all-energy solar is actually perfect for reducing your carbon footprint while also saving money on your monthly electric bill. The fact that solar panels cause no earth-harming emissions while it's producing energy is a bonus. Who in the world could object to that? But they can also help you save money.
Hey, everybody. So during the commercials here, while I'm on my mobile unit, I'm in New York, as I mentioned in the start of the show. This is, I can't stop and start the recording. I'm using a different system. Anyway, it doesn't much matter to you. But over the course of these 3-minute breaks for TV or for radio commercials, I'm going to be chatting with you because that's all I have to do. I could play some music, but I didn't set that up properly in my setup. And I will fix it for the next time that I have to record and broadcast the show like this. But it's kind of fun. I like having a little bit of a challenge on this, and such interesting conversations like this one with Alex is really intriguing. The whole question about how we organize our taxes and the like. Now, this isn't going out on a Facebook live feed, but just for the fun of it, for you to know, if you were on Facebook now and you saw this link pop up, you'd be able to listen to the show live via the Spreaker portal. So if you're on Facebook, you just click on this and it would play it. Now, you're probably listening to this on a podcast after it's been recorded at the end. But anyway, just letting you know, you could listen to it live while it's happening. So it's kind of amazing technology that we can pull all this off, that we can talk to people like this. I'm in New York. Alex is, I think, in Washington, D.C. The studio's in Minneapolis, and we're broadcasting this to you wherever you are, both live and recorded. Pretty amazing. So, all right, we're going to be back into the show here in a second, so I'm going to throw you back into some commercials here in a minute, just so I'm ready, because I got to click a couple buttons to make all that stuff happen and make it a flow. But I really appreciate you being a part of the show. Thanks for listening and all this.
fireplaces, including metal and masonry pizza ovens.
My dog Stenson loves summers, visiting the dog park, long walks in the woods, and sleeping in the sun. But he is missing winter. Oh, not the outdoor outhouse known as paws or frozen ears, but those lovely long nights in front of the fire. I bought an energy-efficient wood stove from Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces about 7 years ago. Having a wood stove means more than lower heating bills. It means a happy dog.
Come see us. We have over 35 working displays in our store, which is just off I-94 at the corner of Riverside and East Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis. Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces, since 1977, out of the ordinary products and services to make fire work for you.
AM950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota. I'm Doug Pagitt, talking with Alexandra Thornton. Alex, thanks for being on. We're talking about taxes and the big tax law. You wrote you had some really great work for at the Center for American Progress in your article about what was going to happen with that tax bill of 2017. And you were suggesting there was going to be all kinds of shenanigans and loopholes and people gaming the system and all, and thought that you, along with so many other experts, were saying it's going to balloon the debt and it's going to make things worse in the economy, at least as far as debt goes. How has it turned out, at least as far as we can tell so far into its first few months?
Well, it's not looking good. We were promised that wages would go up to $4,000 a year for workers, and we've seen wages actually in real terms have actually gone down due to price increases, just slightly. But basically, wages have been stagnant. They said there would be a whole lot more investment, but that's not actually true. Most of the investment indicators show that there's not a lot of extra investment going on over what was happening before. But what we are seeing is a huge number of stock buybacks. A lot of initially there were reports when the bill first passed of a lot of bonuses, and there were some companies really ballyhooing about that. But it turned out that it was like a tiny percentage of companies and of workers. Oh, okay. And there was then a precipitous drop. And it turned out that actually part of the reason why companies were giving bonuses was because their fiscal years for tax purposes crossed over into the 2018, and they were able to get a tax break, a tax deduction for the bonuses they gave earlier, a bigger tax deduction because it would be at the higher 35% rate instead of the new lower corporate rate. Wow. So, and then we've seen historic levels of stock buybacks, companies taking this huge windfall that they've gotten and using it basically to buy back their stock, which tends to make the price of stock go up. And what's also interesting is that the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, just came out with an analysis showing that there's a fairly large number of CEOs and other executives who actually cashed out their shares right after a stock buyback, obviously in order to get the highest amount for their shares. So, and when you look at the corporate tax revenues, back in the 1950s, corporate tax revenues were about a third of total tax revenues that we got from all sources at the federal level. Yeah. And they started going down through the decades and were around roughly a little under 10% before this bill was passed. They've already projected now that they'll drop to about 7.5% of total revenues. So we've seen just a precipitous drop.
And that's total income, right? So because there's this argument that
corporate
conservatives,
income.
Yeah, and I used to buy this argument that said, look, you can have a higher percentage on a smaller amount, or you can have a lower percentage on a larger amount. And the lower percentage on a larger amount could be more advantageous for the tax revenues. But as it turns out, what we have is lower rates on a smaller amount, which seems to be
that's exactly right.
Building this crisis. And it seems like what the current Republican Congress and the Trump administration is doing at every turn is trying to create the least. I'm just trying to lessen the amount of revenue that's coming in. Is there any argument to be made that they're doing anything other than reducing the amount of revenue that's coming in? Like, is there any way to understand what they're doing that's not essentially that?
No. I mean, I think they keep saying that what we should do is cut spending, and they've put out budget proposals showing they would cut Medicare, Medicaid, many of the bedrock programs that our country is sort of built upon, the safety net and so forth. And, so no, they're not. They're just cutting revenue by giving tax cuts mainly to the wealthy and to corporations. And actually the way they're doing it is not smart either, because they claimed before this bill passed that they were going to close all these loopholes and special breaks, but in fact they did was add more. They didn't close the ones that were there, except maybe one. And because of all the loopholes, special breaks, glitches, mistakes, now the bill is costing even more than they said. So originally the Congressional Budget Office said it would cost around $1.5 trillion. Now they've revised their estimates up, and they're saying it's going to be close to $2 trillion over 10 years is going to be the cost, because the cost wasn't covered, and so this is what it will cost our federal budget. And, that means less money for infrastructure, education, and Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, you name it.
And it's curious because the Trump administration is trying to push this idea that, the GDP is growing, that the economy is growing, that the stock market is booming, and yet their own projections on what will happen to federal revenue is that it will be lower. And that just seems to not make any sense. It even seems that the conservative argument should be, we will only grow the federal budget if we grow the economy. But here you have visions or indications of a growing economy, but still shrinking federal revenues. It just doesn't make...
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm a partisan.
Yeah,
I don't think anything that does make sense. Because math doesn't work.
Yeah, we're seeing an initial bump from the tax cut. Because corporations now have even more, they're more awash in cash. But so we're seeing an initial bump, but all economists across the spectrum say that it's just going to be an initial bump and then GDP is going to go back down. And of course, the stock market is going up because, we've got all these stock buybacks and because of the current atmosphere, but that's eventually going to correct too, and most economists say that will, sooner or later that's going to happen too. And by the way, I mean, the economy has been basically going along at a steady upward trajectory since well into the early parts of the Obama administration. So this isn't something that happened, because of the tax bill.
Well, that's Alex Thornton.
And,
Alex, we promised people an
ahead.
exciting conversation, and you delivered. It's fantastic. And if you want to find Alex, there's this great article called 11 Ways the Wealthy and Corporations Will Game the New Tax Law. It's worth Googling and looking that up. Alex, thanks so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate it. It's very helpful for me. I'm sure it was for others as well.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks for staying with us here. AM950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. I'm Doug Pagitt in Drive Time.
Man walking along the railroad tracks, going someplace and there's no going back.
All right, everybody. Yes. Hey, so I'm going to try something. I might mess up my little recording here, but I'm going to try something live while we're talking. I'm going to see if I can throw iTunes in here. And so I don't know what you're hearing, but I'm just doing this. All right, I'm going to see if I can play. I'm going to see if I can play music.
Contractor online in the metro area.
Sorry,
over the years, Ryan has always said the same thing to me about his work. If we build it, shouldn't we be held accountable for the work indefinitely? He backed that statement up years ago when Snap Construction was a pioneer in.
All right, I was trying to get music to play live for you, but have to do it next time. So thanks for sticking in there with me. Well, we're going to be back here in a minute, and I'm going to chat a little bit about some local news in the Minnesota, and a little thoughts about Donald Trump. A daily rant, as I like to say, about Donald Trump. So, yeah, I know it's not the most exciting thing to hear me just sort of shoot the breeze while waiting for the commercials to end. But, as good as commercials are, which they are, really good. In fact, they make this wheel go around here at the radio station. So, I'm not down on commercials or anything. In fact, if any of you like to be an advertiser, I'd love to talk to you about that. But sometimes it's just hard to listen to when you're, doing what you're doing, listening to a podcast. It just doesn't feel right for a lot of people. So I'm just going to keep keeping you company, during the commercials. Your commercial chatterbox. So going to be talking about the Minnesota State Fair, and we're going to see how that goes. All right. This has got to be the worst sounding podcast ever. I got to figure this out because I'm super uncomfortable.
Warner here for Warner Stellian to share my latest attempt to help you break up with your tired, inefficient appliances. Replace them. Get our guaranteed lowest price on beautiful, super efficient ones. Plus $50 for every appliance replaced. Plus, free delivery and basic installation from our trusted specialists. And 18 months, 0-interest financing. This is a great deal, so we can only afford to extend this offer for a very short time. Don't wait. Choose Warner Stellian and save on incredible new appliances today.
Hi, Minnesota. Norman Goldman here. Join me every weekday from 5 to 8 p.m. for some clarity, wit, and wisdom on the latest issues of the day here on AM950. Today on the show, Paul Manafort's trial starts in Russiagate. There is a pardon dangling out there. Will we get it before the trial starts, or will they wait? Let's find out. Join me for 3 live hours of the Norman Goldman Show every weeknight here from 5 to 8 on AM950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
With your AM950 weather, I'm Brett Johnson. For clear skies tonight with a low around 65. Wednesday, a slight chance for rain with a high near 78. Thursday, sunny with a high around 76. And Friday, sunny with a high around 86. PJW Automotive is a family-owned car and truck maintenance and repair business. They offer quality and dependability the first time around and have been in business for over 30 years. They're located in New Brighton, 1 exit north of 694 and 35W, so see why it's worth the drive to PJW Automotive. Online at pjwauto.com.
AM950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Check Pagitt in from New York City today. Hey, Brett, how are things back there in the lovely state of Minnesota? Everything hanging in there all right?
Hey, Brett. Going well here. I'm not quite the liberal elitist, as they say, being in New York City.
I am in the heart of it all, I'll tell you.
The heart of Well, I guess Trump was from New York, so I don't know how he can necessarily say that.
Well, it's really
liberal elite.
You walk down the street and you see Trump Tower, and you're like, I'm not sure, that this is really this is really your enemies here, buddy. Hey, by the way, I want to ask you a little bit about the Minnesota State Fair first. Are you a Minnesota State Fair attendee?
I haven't gone in quite a few years, actually, myself.
Well, I was thinking
I haven't been there in quite a while.
I haven't gone in a number of years either. After our children are no longer of the age that I feel like I need to take them to the fair, I'm like, I'm just not going ever again. But I know a lot of people like it, and I thought maybe with this big tax breaks that the wealthy like you are getting from this Trump administration, you'd want to go to take on the 26 new beer varieties that are happening at the Minnesota State Fair. I don't know if you saw this one.
Wow!
If you saw this one yet today, but they are coming out with all kinds of new flavored beers, like the licorice infused Pilsner, which is rimmed with a sugar spice mix. I mean, this is State Fair beer that has now become this level of funny, I don't know what you'd even call it, like kind of carnival beer or something. I don't know. Are you a beer connoisseur yourself?
Kind of, yeah. Actually, one of our great advertisers on Bibulus, I go there quite a bit because they have some great local beers where you can build your own 4 or 6 packs. Little plug there, but
really?
Yeah, I definitely enjoy the local craft beers. Yeah,
I think we ought to go do a show from there.
And but I didn't know the state beer was offered. What's that?
I think we ought to go over there and do a show from there someday. We got to do.
Oh, absolutely! I've been there. Yeah, it's it's a great location in Northeast Minneapolis that I just love. Yeah, you can make your own customized 4 and 6 packs of craft beer. It's great.
Well, I think there's a show idea in the making right there. Well, if you make it out to the state
I
fair,
think so too. Yeah,
they have the deep fried vanilla cake flavored beer from Mankato Brewery. The people over at Finnegan's, they're putting out a caramel corn cream ale. I don't know if Matt is onto this yet, but if Matt was bothered by the fact that there were little rentable scooters that you could get for the hipsters, I mean, this funnel cake ice cream ale and the Gaelic dark and stormy lime and ginger accented beer is just...
Anything hipster just absolutely annoys him. So yeah, I'm going to pass that along to him. He'll be all over that.
Well, I think when I'm sure the station will do broadcasting from the Minnesota State Fair, right? Isn't that a standard a standard AM950?
We haven't in a few years, and still unknown if we'll be out there this year. There's just a lot of logistics that go into it and costs and stuff like that. But we'd love to, but it's tough to do. Yeah. Let's
try to rally up something, or maybe we could just do one of these kind of remote ones right from the fair and do some little tap in, because it's I don't know. It seems like a really fun kind of connection. Hey, a little bad Trump news. I don't know if you're if you are on the Trump email list. I am. I choose to be on their fundraiser list. Part of the reason is whatever amount of pennies it costs them, or fractions of pennies, to have to send an email, I want them to have to waste it on me. And I also want to keep up on what they're doing. And so I receive these Donald J. Trump emails. They come from Donald J. Trump in the address, and there's a little black box at the top that reads "Authorized by Trump headquarters." And so every day I get one of these emails from them. And here's what it reads today, and I think it's really curious. It reads, "Hey Doug, the media," Donald Trump apparently writing, but all these words are spelled correctly, so I don't think it was him. I think maybe it was somebody outside the campaign or in the administration writing this. But the media hopes their coverage of me will get so nasty that I'll give up from our fight. Which the sentence doesn't really even make any sense. And then in all caps and with red letters, "That day will never come," it reads. And then it says this: "I promise you that I'll fight for you, and there's nothing our enemies could ever do to make me walk away from that promise." Our enemies could ever do. He starts out by saying the media hopes that their coverage of me will get so nasty I'll give up the fight, and there's nothing our enemies could ever do to make me walk away. The idea that in print he sends to people on this email list that confession that he wants us all to understand that the media is our enemy. It is a kind of subtle anti-American notion that I think should be held in great caution to all of us. Whatever level the media has to play in our society, and whatever level the media has to play in our politics, the media is not the enemy of the people. Other people who disagree with you are not our enemies. People in the United States of America should not refer to other people in our country as enemies. I would prefer if people in our country didn't refer to people in other countries as our enemies, but at least the argument should be made as people in the United States that we are not seeing those who differ with us as our enemies. Like, enemies language is something that you hold and keep for activities that bring harm to the United States from the outside, if you're being even if you're trying to be some sort of a Trump-like nationalist. But this idea that he sends an email out to just jokers like me that are on the email list and claims that the enemies our enemies will never cause him to break his promise. And the enemies he's referring to are the media. And then it's a fundraiser, of course, and there's 5-6 boxes here that say contribute $20, $15, $10, and a picture of the president at the bottom. And then another place to contribute $5. So it's a money grab for sure. But the idea that they're going to try to raise money off of the argument that the media is our enemies is something that even Trump supporters should say, that kind of argument, that kind of structure of making your point does not fit us. It sinks below the level at which we're willing to talk about one another in this country. I think it's just it sits at the heart of the problem, right? The heart of the problem is that we would consider people to be enemies. Now, look, I think Donald Trump is a threat to the democracy. I think Donald Trump is a threat to the institutions in the United States. But this is a threat that's happening from within. This is a threat. This is corruption and treason from within. If he wants to call the media treasonous, I guess that's fair. But to call us the enemy is not only a step too far, it's just structured in all the wrong ways. Hey, Mark in Fridley, you have some thoughts about the GOP tax policy, but I bet you also have some thoughts about Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States, calling the media enemies. But let's talk about tax policy first.
Well, what I'd like to know if there's any conservative economists out there that can explain to me how less tax revenue, where you borrow money for tax cuts, combined with increased spending, is ever going to work. But I want to explain to people, and your previous guest did a great job, but she mentioned the words buybacks. And I want to explain to people what buybacks really are, because it's basically institutionalized.
You're talking about a stock buyback.
Yeah.
Where companies take the revenue and they buy back their own stock that other stockholders would own. Yeah. So, okay, give us a rundown on that.
You're artificially manipulating the stock price by using borrowed money from the government, and the only reason you're doing that is because your compensation is based on what the stock price is.
Yeah, so you're saying that by them buying their stock, when a company issues a stock, the stock is now out of their control, and now it's on the free market. Like if you sold a toaster at a garage sale, the company that made the toaster is no longer making money. But you're saying that when the company themselves buy it back, they're ginning up the price of their stock because it's not a stockholder that's buying it. Because the stockholder thinks it's valuable, it's the company buying it, and that makes the system respond as if a stockholder is buying it. So that's what you mean by ginning up the...
Right.
Yeah.
And what you're not doing, Doug, is you're not reinvesting that capital into the business.
Mm-hmm.
You're investing that capital into propping up the stock market price, which is not a reflection of what the business is doing. So instead of compensating your employees, adding new equipment, doing research and development, you're not doing that anymore. You're not creating more jobs. You're not, buying more equipment. That's great for the economy. All you're doing is pumping up artificially the stock price on money that you borrow, so the CEO's compensation can be 700 times that of the lowest paid employees. So that's what a stock buyback is, and that's why a guy like Paul Wellstone knew what he was doing when he proposed in 2002, 2 weeks before he died, Senate Bill 3143, the Shareholder and Investment Protection Act, Consumer Protection Act.
Right.
And we need to call our Congress people and say, Sarbanes-Oxley was set up fail. It had monstrous loopholes in that nobody realized when they supported it after Enron and WorldCom. And Dodd-Frank hasn't worked, and now we have this stock buyback scam mechanism, and all it is institutional corruption. Yeah. And it's, has the blessings of both parties, and the top 1% is making more money than they knew what to do with, and instead of creating jobs, they're pumping up their own compensation.
Well, thanks, Mark. That's super helpful, and I really appreciate it. And this is one of the things that a lot of people have realized in the last 25 years, and that is that our economy is no longer built on the premise of capitalism. It's built on the premise of evaluation. And capital would tell you that there has to be capital. Evaluation means that something has value simply based on what you think its future value is going to be worth. So stocks are not, the value of a stock is not built on the capital evaluation of a company. In fact, there's a lot of companies that have a lot of value in their company. They would own factories and they would own products and all kinds of things that would have some value. They could even own bars of gold, for crying out loud. But they'd be valued less in the stock market because the stock market is about future earning potential. And this idea, because the stock market is not the same as the economy, but so many people get that confused, and all the time people are thinking that the valuation of the stock market is the same as the economy, and it's not. So as Mark brings up, and as Alex Thornton brings up, it's ginning up the economy.
Well, a doctor comes around here with his face all bright.
It's a fantastic Springsteen song. We'll be back
And
here
he
after the break.
says in a little while you'll be all right. All he gives is a humbug pill, a dose of...
Jeff Warner here for...
Oh, such a great song. Hate to cut that one off. That one's called How Can a Poor Man Stand Such Times and Live? A Springsteen song that he did live outside of New Orleans a year or two after Hurricane Katrina. Remember that? How long ago that was, Hurricane Katrina, back during the Bush administration, when there was a sense that a presidential administration could not become any more inept. Well, I'm chewing up some material. I think I'm going to launch into that in this next segment here, since Brett picked it so well. But this whole taxes thing is just really, really madness. Now, look, I don't think anyone knows, and I'll say this here when we get in the break, I think anyone knows really how the economy works. I mean, just to be blunt, to be honest about it, economists aren't sure, business owners aren't sure. Everybody's approximating what activities will do that will cause something to happen in the stock market, or that will happen, something to happen in the economy. But what we know doesn't work is what the Republicans are advocating. I mean, it's just, it's really something stunning. So I'm going to throw you back into commercials here because I got to read a couple of things to get back into the segment, to get ready for this segment. So sorry, you're gonna get a minute 30 worth of some commercials, but they're not bad. They're not good, but they're not bad. Here's John Peterson, Ferndale Market.
Stores. One of our partners since the beginning has been Birchwood Cafe, and we're excited to announce a new partnership product, the Birchwood Turkey Burger Patty. Made from their popular turkey burger recipe, using our antibiotic-free turkey and Birchwood's local and organic ingredients. Put an end to bland turkey burgers. Find this and all our Ferndale turkey products at your local co-op or natural food store. Visit ferndalemarket.com.
Hi, Gregory Rich, host of AM950's Drinkin' the Style. Are you a fan of cool? Then let me introduce you to Gus Modern. Available exclusively in the Twin Cities at Habitation Furnishing and Design, Gus Modern is kind of mid-century, kind of contemporary, and 100% cool. Timeless, comfortable, awesome, and through August 19th, 20% off. Visit gusmodern.com or stop in at Habitation at 4317 Excelsior Boulevard and check it out.
Guess who called me the other day? You did. Hi, Mark Sommerfeld of Computer Revolution in Roseville. I want to thank AM950 listeners who called to thank us for supporting the station. So here's an offer exclusive to 950 listeners. Bring your broken computer or cell phone to our Roseville store, say I'm an AM950 listener, and you'll receive $20 off any repair. Computer Revolution with cell phone repair, located in Roseville at Highway 36 and Fairview Avenue, or call 651-633-6600. And thanks.
Got left to drown. Tell me, how can a poor man stand such times?
Hey, welcome back to AM950, Progressive Voice of Minnesota. Doug Pagitt in here, Drive Time. That's a, Brett, nice find on that one. That's one of my favorite Springsteen songs, called How Can a Poor Man Stand Such Times and Live?
It seemed fitting considering what we were kind of talking about.
Yeah, that's a great find. That was a song that he did actually a couple of years, a year or two after Hurricane Katrina in a fundraiser there, and it's a remake of an old song from the 1930s. And it raises this question about, when an administration doesn't help people who are under such pressure, how can they rise above? And that was way back, in 2006. I think that the fundraiser happened for Hurricane Katrina victims, back when we thought that could be about as inept as a presidential administration could ever be. Remember those days when people thought that Hurricane Katrina was the natural disaster that showed the failure of an administration?
Yeah, and Trump kind of did the old "hold my beer" thing, if you know that meme going around, and has one-upped it, unfortunately.
No, say that again. What's the meme that's going around?
Oh, it's the old thing where someone says, "Well, I did something this poorly," and a guy says, "Hold my beer, I'll do even worse." Oh. It's a meme on the internet.
That's great.
That's kind of what Trump has done. Yeah.
Yeah, Trump is saying, "Hold my beer." If you think Hurricane Katrina was a disaster, how about this? I've often referred to the Trump administration as a natural disaster, and that we have to prepare for it like you do a natural disaster. We're just in the middle of it for 2 to 4 years, and the real work comes after it's over, and how do you recover from it, because the damage is so severe, and I'm just worried that some of the damage being done. And we are just a couple of weeks out from Election Day here, primary Election Day here in Minnesota, just over 2 weeks, or 2 weeks from today, I guess it is. And these are questions that we should be raising to everybody who wants to represent the Democratic Party. We should ask them about tax policy. We should ask them about the Trump administration. I'm a big fan of Richard Painter. I'd love to talk to Tina Smith. I could maybe become a fan of hers if she'd like to come on the show here. I'd love to talk with her about it. But I like that Richard Painter and others are out there saying, hey, here's where I stand on this issue. I think Trump is a real threat, and we need to do something about it. And I would like all of our politicians to rise up and have some courage of their conscience to say something, especially Democrats from the great state of Minnesota. I've been harping on this for weeks now, that this is one of the great states. This is one of the great bastions of democratic ideals, especially in our federally elected officials. And it's time for them to start voicing that and to lead this country and not to be followers. It's easy to want to just fall into the same old policy debates. And I'm going to get to Gary in Minneapolis here in a minute talking about tax cuts. It was kind of nice to talk with Alex Thornton from the Center for American Progress and even talk with Mark about, tax policy and fiscal policy, because it just feels like, okay, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to, as a nation, have discussions and debates about what policies we want and what policies we think are important. We shouldn't be having to say, do you think the president colluded with Russia? Do you think the president's campaign manager is going to be sent to prison? Do you think that the president's national security advisor is getting off on leniency when he admitted to being conspiring against the United States of America? Like, we should never be in this kind of ridiculous situation we find ourselves in with Donald Trump. We're supposed to be able to have the long-term discussions and arguments in this country about policy and about parties and about partisanship. That's good for us. We should have those conversations. We shouldn't be having to have these other ones. So let's just pretend for another 4 minutes here of the radio show that we can talk about the old days. Gary from Minneapolis, tax cuts for the rich. What's on your mind about that?
Yeah, before I get into that, I want to thank your station so much. There's a congressman that was very exceptional, a very special one. When I was younger, I think he got elected to Congress in 1970. He served 27 years, and they're commemorating him. He passed away Monday. Ron Dellums, and he was from California. He was very good. I think he was out of the socialist movement, labor socialism, and he was one of the last really good labor New Deal liberals that really fought against poverty and against war. The only war they said he voted for was to help Somalia out. Hey, and they told a lot of details I didn't even know about him. And I still remember hearing him on C-SPAN years ago, and he was really, really outspoken and fought for justice for people. And one of the things he said about him was, he said one of the best way to fight poverty is gender equality, wages in the workplace. There you go. And anyway, but to get back to the
real quick,
dire straight with Trump and the Republicans, these tax cuts, that's what they did with Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. It took 3 presidents to destroy the economy then with these tax giveaways. I don't know how quick it's coming, but it's bad, and they can't handle the economy. I think it's greed. They don't like to admit that. They just can't get enough money and take it from the rest of us, and they get their money off the actual working people.
Hey, thanks, Gary.
So anyway, I guess I said enough.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, you haven't said enough, but that's all we have time for today. Keep calling in. I really appreciate it. Hey, Brad from St. Paul, what's in your mind?
Here's the real problem is you give people too much credit for wanting to be informed. Until people have an ability to know that this is even a problem, you know, they're too worried about the Twins game, stupid crap like that pays them nothing. You know, I've always had the idea that if I won the lotto, I would buy highway signs with one name, and I put that name on there. I would have pages like AM950, ProjectCensored.org, Intercept. Most people don't know this is even going on or have no clue that the fairness doctrine has been abolished. And over the airwaves, they can legally lie to you, mislead you, and now with the NDAA,
it's amazing, isn't
propaganda is legal.
Yeah.
And until, you know, Joe Blow knows about this, and Joe and Julie Lunchbucket know about it, forget it. I don't think it's ever going to change.
Well, I think you're right.
And they've had their way for a long time, and when they allowed the conglomeration, and Bill Clinton was part of this, with the Telecommunications Act of 1996, that was the beginning of the end of any real information unless you seek it out and really look for it. Yeah. And I've got some right-wing friends. You couldn't convince these guys, and they got PhD.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm with you. And I really do think we have to work hard to get the word out. And you know, I've been saying for a long time here, we have to turn up the volume, not only on the decibels of what we're saying it a little louder, but also turn up the volume in the sense of the amount. There needs to be more of it. We need to say more things in more times to more people in more ways. And I know politics isn't everyone's thing. They're not interested in it. I get that. And there's many things that make my life function and be positive and beneficial that I don't consider or think about at all. Like the sanitation system that exists in the United States and that I benefit from greatly, and we all do, right? I don't really think about our sewer systems. I don't really think about our water and where it comes from, but we all benefit greatly from it. So I know some people take advantage of politics because other people are worrying about it. But those of us who do, to your point, Brad, to those of us who do think about this, it's incumbent upon us to just keep raising the questions, to keep raising the stories, to keep doing it with a wink and a smile and with a shake of our finger and with a stern scowl at times. But we just have to say what we can in all the places that we can and just a little bit more because we're in those days. So, Brad, thanks for sharing that today. And I'm glad to be sharing this with you here on Drive Time on AM950. The progressive voice of Minnesota. I'm Doug Pagitt. Not going to be in tomorrow, but I'll talk to you on Thursday. So. See you then.
Don't touch that.
All right, everybody. Hey, thanks. Here we go. I'm going to just post this live. I'm using a live stream from Spreaker, which is my podcasting system, to do this. So I just did it live. I'm just going to hit save, and then that's it. So thanks for listening. I really appreciate being part of the podcast.